Good morning everybody, welcome back to Indycar on Thursday the 16th of August 2018. My name's Gordon Ross and in the news this morning we're looking at two subjects. The first one is to do with the date of the next independence referendum, and the second subject is the Scottish GDP figures, the gross domestic product figures, and we'll be looking at why it is that Scotland's economic growth is twice the rate of the rest of the United Kingdom. But first, let's talk about the independence referendum and the date, or the lack of the date, from the SNP. Now, yesterday you'll have heard me talking about this and asking about why the SNP did not have the independence referendum date on the schedule of their agenda for the next conference in October. Now, the reason for that, I explained yesterday, is that they can't actually put a date on it at the moment because we don't know anything about Brexit yet. We need to have a lot more information about it. But there is an argument which says that actually waiting until after Brexit may have a better effect on the result of the referendum than if we go too soon. In other words, if we go before Brexit, we might not get as many votes as we would if we went afterwards. Now, the argument goes something like this. During the 2014 referendum, when everybody was voting yes or no to independence, the offer on the table at the time was independence within Europe. That was what was in the white paper, and that did not satisfy every single yes voter, because later on in the Brexit vote, something like 30% of yes voters voted for Brexit. That's a considerable number of people. When you realise that 1.6 million people voted yes in the independence referendum in 2014, that equates to somewhere in the region of 400,000 Scots who actually want Brexit to happen, but who also want to vote for independence. Now, if you take those 400,000 people and you say you want to be independent but part of Europe, then those 400,000 people are not going to be very happy about that. They're less likely to vote for independence on that basis than they would be had we said independence without any restriction on whether we're in Europe or out of it. And the other argument for this later date is to do with the fact that until we actually leave the European Union, the physical reality of Brexit will not be apparent to a lot of voters. A lot of people are still got their heads in the sand thinking it's not going to happen and that the effects will not be as bad as everybody says. However, if we wait until several months after Brexit happens, let's assuming that Brexit happens on the 29th of March, and the effects of that, the economic effects of that, start to bite and the realities come home to people, prices start to rise, the pound plummets, they can't go on holiday, they can't get visas to go anywhere, there's travel chaos, etc, etc. All of the things that have been talked about as being the worst case scenario. If any of that happens, then it starts to physically affect people, and only then do they really realise what we were saying was right. And then they are more likely to vote for independence later. Now, the other side of this coin is the fact that the people who voted for Brexit but also want independence are thinking a little bit further ahead perhaps than the rest of us. I've mentioned before 2 or 3 times in this programme that after Brexit, assuming that it goes ahead, there's a strong argument for Scotland actually staying out of the EU but joining the European Free Trade Association, because that would allow Scotland to trade into Europe without being a part of it, would allow us to participate in European projects without being a part of it. We would still have almost all of our sovereignty intact, although there would still be free movement of people, goods and services, but Scotland's sovereignty would be completely intact. The benefit of this is that we would be able to continue to trade with the rest of the UK with an open border, and it would get rid of the problem of there being a border somewhere between Scotland and England because we were in the EU and England was not. So it makes it a lot more flexible if we actually leave the European Union first and then vote for independence and become independent, and that allows us to trade in the way that's most beneficial to us. The timetables that have been set out, there was one particular one I read in the National the other day. The columnist's name escapes me at the moment, but it was probably Gordon McIntyre Kemp. But his point was that if we wait until after Brexit and then we have a vote sometime in September next year, then by that time people will be feeling the effects of Brexit. We will have left the European Union officially, and so Scotland after that would be, once it's independent, able as a completely new country with no EU membership to reapply straight away. And having already met all of the requirements of membership for the European Union, we could either join it or become part of a free trade agreement or whatever we like, but because we were already members of it, the European Union doesn't have any problems with us coming straight in on any agreement that we want. Okay, that leads me into the second part of today's show, which is it was announced today that the growth rate in the Scottish economy is now double that of the rest of the UK. There are many reasons why this might be the case, but the most obvious one that springs to mind is that the Scottish economy is balanced. It has a strong manufacturing sector, it has a strong exporting sector, it has a strong digital and banking sector, it has scientific research, medical research, and so on. The list goes on and on. Of excellent food, textiles, tourism. Scottish economy is buoyant. And the reason it's buoyant is because the risks in our economy are spread so evenly through a balanced economy. In England, the economy is heavily skewed towards banking and what you might call white-collar jobs, with very little manufacturing and very little exporting still going on. And so the English economy is struggling as a result to expand at all. Now add on to that the spectre of Brexit, and what happens is Europeans particularly view Scotland and England very differently. The Scottish economy looks attractive because it's balanced, it's stable, it's got a stable government, it's got a slightly socialist government, but it's mostly centre-left. Scotland has strong exports, Scotland has a mountain of natural resources, and it is a fully functioning democracy. England, on the other hand, has a weak government which is balanced on a knife edge almost all of the time. It's not a safe place to invest because the pound is likely to collapse once Brexit takes place. Not only that, but Britain has very little exports, and so its trade deficit is gigantic. It imports far more than it exports. And once Brexit fully bites, a lot of the trade, which it currently relies on over 40% of its imports coming from the European Union, will have to go up in price because of World Trade Organization tariffs. It's going to make England and Wales a very expensive place to live, a very expensive place to locate a business, and the amount of money in the economy available in people's pockets to be spent is going to be almost zero. England will probably slide back into recession. Scotland, on the other hand, our economy is heading away from the drain. England's economy is circling the plug hole at the moment. Scotland's is moving away from that danger zone by expanding again. And it's expanding partly because of an increase in things like the oil price, an increase in activity in the oil and gas sector, an increase in activity in the North Sea in general with regards to things like decommissioning oil rigs, and an increase in the development of both wind, offshore wind and offshore tidal energy in Scotland, as well as a raft of other expanding businesses in the Scottish economy. So from outside of the United Kingdom, Scotland looks like the place to invest your money, because if nothing else, once Brexit is complete, other countries would be expecting Scotland to leave the UK, because, as they've already pointed out many times in the past, the money markets in the US, the money markets around the world would expect Scotland to leave the UK and rejoin Europe in some way, either by free trade agreement without the strings attached to it, without the red lines, or by rejoining the European Union after we've left the UK, by, again, another referendum. But either way, the outside world expects Scotland to both be successful and expects Scotland to leave Brexit Britain as soon as possible. So that weight of expectation is on us, and it's up to the people of Scotland to manage the expectations of the rest of the world, because the rest of the world wants to trade with Scotland, the rest of the world wants to invest here, and the rest of the world expects us to do the sensible thing, because the rest of the world knows the people in Scotland aren't stupid, and that they have woken up to the fact that the British state is crumbling around them. And not only is it crumbling around them, it has now decided to commit suicide in terms of trading with the European Union for no apparent reason other than to keep people out of the UK. Now that's fine. The rest of the UK wants to manage its immigration by isolating itself, then that's fine for them. In Scotland, we have maintained consistently all the way through this Brexit process an opposition to it, and a fundamental want, a fundamental desire to keep in contact and to keep trading with Europe in whatever form we decide to do after we've left the UK. But the point is, Scotland's an attractive place to invest. It's an attractive place for people to come. It's a nice place to live. People are supported well here. They get free prescriptions, free bridge tolls, free bus passes, free social care, all of it paid out of taxation. And although that taxation is a tiny bit higher than the rest of the UK, it's a price that most people are happy to pay to have those services. So the place is attractive. England, unfortunately, is not looking attractive, either to investors or to people coming to the UK for work. There are more people, more Europeans have left the UK in the last 12 months than at any time before 1974. There's been an exodus of Europeans from the United Kingdom. So perhaps the population problem in England will disappear, but also a large number of valuable and vital workers will vanish back to Europe as well. In Scotland, we're feeling the pinch with things like fruit picking, but that again is something that we can solve after we have Brexited and after we've left the UK by agreement with the European Union. These are things that we can sort out for ourselves. But the point is today, be optimistic, because despite the fact that the timetable for the referendum might slip, I may be completely wrong. A lot of things can happen between now and March next year. It might well be that there's another catastrophe in Westminster and there's another forced general election, in which case we'll be fighting again to get SNP members voted in as MPs in England. And it could well be that a mandate or even a majority of SNP MPs will be enough to secure our independence. It can be used that way. But whatever happens, the 400,000 people who currently want to be independent and also want to be out of Europe need to be taken into account. That's fully 1/3 of our numbers. And we can't be against everybody. Those people who also want to leave the European Union have a right to that opinion. Whether I agree with it or not doesn't matter. The point is that there is a solution to that, which is to have the referendum after we've left the European Union. And at a point where the people of Scotland have experienced what Brexit is like, they feel it, and they will be in a position to judge whether independence would be better than that situation they find themselves in. And these are the forces which are pushing and pulling people towards independence. But we cannot write off those independence voters who also voted for Brexit. We can't write them off as lunatics or nutcases, because they're not. They have a reason for thinking the way they do. And in some cases, they may well be right. And I'm quite happy to be proved wrong in my view that we might want to stay in Europe after we leave the UK, at least for a while, until we decide what to do next. But that indeed might actually be okay to some people who voted Brexit. Sorry, as long as that's a temporary measure, and there would be another plebiscite on the options for trading with Europe after Scotland has left the UK. So there's a lot of things to consider, but basically, two things I want you to remember. One is that a late referendum is not a disaster. It does run the risk of losing powers through Holyrood, and it would need to be carefully timed, but I'm pretty certain that the SNP leadership has got this very carefully well in hand and are considering all the risks to both Holyrood as well as to winning the referendum whenever it is, and it will be timed to give us maximum traction, and at a point where it's maximum discomfort for the UK government. There is a point in the affairs of, well, Shakespeare once said, there is a tide in the affairs of men which, if taken at the flood, leads to glory. I'm paraphrasing, but the point is, if you time it right at just the right moment, then it will take us over the line. So we have to be patient. There's an awful lot of things could happen between now and March 29th. But the point is, a late referendum may not be the end of the world, but I would not want to see it go beyond about September 2019. I think if it goes beyond there, we run a serious risk of losing control of Scotland completely if the Tories get their way. Anyway, I'll leave it there today. But remember, Scotland's growth is twice that of the rest of the UK, and we have a substantial number of people who voted for Brexit who also want independence. So let's not forget them when we're campaigning. Let's make them feel welcome. And also, let's not argue too much about what happens with Europe. Let's get ourselves out of the UK first. It could be that the reality of Brexit after the 29th of March is just the ticket, just the medicine to get people to see why independence is a better option. Bye for now.